Prologue, Part 1. So You Want to Be a Wizard by Diane Duane. Part of the problem, Nita thought as she tore desperately down Rose Avenue, is that I can't keep my mouth shut. She had been running for 5 minutes now, hopping fences, sliding sideways through hedges, but she was losing her wind. Some ways behind her she could hear Joanne and Glenda and the rest of them pounding along in pursuit, threatening to replace her latest, now fading black eye. Well, Joanne would come up to her with that new bike, all chrome and silver and gear shift levers, and the speedometer and toe clips and water bottle, and ask what she thought of it. So Nita had told her. Actually, she had told Joanne what she thought of her. The bike was all right. In fact, it had been almost exactly the one that Nita had wanted so much for her last birthday. The birthday when she got nothing but clothes. Life can be really rotten sometimes, Nita thought. She wasn't really so irritated about that at the moment, however. Running away from a beating was taking up most of her attention. "Callahan!" came a yell from behind her. "I'm going to pound you up and mail you home in bottles." I wonder how many bottles it'll take, Nita thought, without much humor. She couldn't afford to laugh. With their bikes, they'd catch up to her pretty quickly, and then... She tried not to think of the scene there would be later at home, her father raising hands and eyes to the ceiling, wondering loudly enough for the whole house to hear, "Why didn't you hit them back?" Her sister making belligerent noises over her new battle scars, her mother shaking her head, looking away silently because she understood. It was her sad look that would hurt Nita more than the bruises and scrapes and swollen face would. Her mother would shake her head, clean the hurts up, and sigh. Crud, Nita thought. The breath was coming hard to her now. She was going to have to try to hide, to wait them out. But where? Most of the people around here didn't want kids running through their yards. There was old crazy Swale's house with its big landscape yard, but the rumors among the neighborhood kids said that weird things happened in there. Nita herself had noticed that the guy didn't go to work like normal people. Better to get beat up again than go in there. But where can I hide? She kept on running down Rose Avenue, and the answer presented itself to her. A little brown brick building with windows warmly alight. Refuge, safety, sanctuary. The library. It's open, it's open. I forgot it was open late on Saturday. Oh, thank heaven. The sight of it gave Nita a new burst of energy. She cut across its tidy lawn, lopped up the walk, took the 5 stairs to the porch in 2 jumps, bumped open the front door and closed it behind her, a little too loudly. The library had been a private home once, and it hadn't lost the look of one despite the crowding of all its rooms with bookshelves. The walls were paneled in mahogany and oak, and the place smelled warm and brown and booky. At the thump of the door, Mrs. Lesser, the weekend librarian, glanced up from her desk, about to say something sharp. Then she saw who was standing there and how hard she was breathing. Mrs. Lesser frowned at Nita and then grinned. She didn't miss much. "There's no one downstairs," she said, nodding at the door that led to the children's library in the single big basement room. "Keep quiet, and I'll get rid of them." "Thanks," Nita said, and went thumping down the cement stairs. As she reached the bottom, she heard the bump and squeak of the front door opening again. Nita paused to hear voices and found that she couldn't. Doubting that her pursuers could hear her either, she walked on into the children's library, smiling slightly at the books and the bright posters. She still loved the place. She loved any library, big or little. There was something about all that knowledge, all those facts waiting patiently to be found that never failed to give her a shiver. When friends couldn't be found, the books were always waiting with something new to tell. Life that was getting too much the same could be shaken up in a few minutes by the picture in a book of some ancient temple, newly discovered deep in a rainforest, a fuzzy photo of Uranus with its up and down rings, or a prismed picture taken through the faceted eye of a bee. And though she would rather have died than admit it, no respectable 13-year-old ever set foot down there, she still loved the children's library, too. Nita had gone through every book in the place when she was younger, reading everything in sight. Fiction and non-fiction alike, fairy tales, science books, horse stories, dog stories, music books, art books, even the encyclopedias. Bookworm, she heard the old jeering voices go in her head. Four Eyes, Smart Ass, Hide in the House and Read, Walking Encyclopedia, Think You're So Hot. No, she remembered herself answering once. I just like to find things out. And she sighed, feeling rueful. That time she had found out about being punched in the stomach. She strolled between shelves, looking at titles, smiling as she met old friends. Books she had read 3 times or 5 times or a dozen. Just a title or an author's name would be enough to summon up happy images. Strange creatures like phoenixes and psalm-heads, moving under smoky London daylight of 100 years before, in company with groups of bemused children, starships and new worlds and the limitless vistas of interstellar night, outer space challenged but never conquered, princesses in silver and golden dresses, princes and heroes carrying swords like sharpened lines of light, monsters rising out of weedy tarns, wild creatures that talked and tricked one another. I used to think the world would be like that when I got older. Wonderful all the time, exciting, happy, instead of the way it is. Something stopped Nita's hand as it ran along the bookshelf. She looked and found that one of the books, a little library-bound volume in shiny red buckram, had a loose thread at the top of its spine, on which her finger had caught. She pulled the finger free, glanced at the title. It was one of those "So You Want to Be a" book series on careers. So you want to be a pilot, there had been, and so you want to be a scientist, a nurse, a writer. But this one said, so you want to be a wizard. A what? Nita pulled the book off the shelf, surprised not so much by the title as by the fact that she'd never seen it before. She thought she knew the whole stock of the children's library. Yet this wasn't a new book. It had plainly been there for some time. The pages had that yellow look about their edges, the color of aging, and the top of the book was dusty. So you want to be a wizard. Herndson, the spine said. That was the author's name. Phoenix Press, the publisher, and then in white ink in Mrs. Lesser's tidy handwriting, 793.4, the Dewey Decimal number. This has to be a joke, Nita said to herself. But the book looked exactly like all the others in the series. She opened it carefully so as not to crack the binding, and turned the first few pages to the table of contents. Normally Nita was a fast reader, and would quickly have finished a page with only a few lines on it. But what she found on that contents page slowed her down a great deal. Preliminary determinations, a question of aptitude. Wizardly preoccupations and predilections. Basic equipment and milius. Introduction to spells, bindings, and gisa. Familiars and heat-meats, advice to the initiate. Psychotropic spelling. Psycho what? Nita turned to the page on what that chapter began, looking at the bold-faced paragraph beneath its title. Warning. Spells of power sufficient to make temporary changes in the human mind are always subject to sudden and unpredictable backlash on the user. The practitioner is cautioned to make sure that his or her motives are benevolent before attempted spelling aimed at... I don't believe this, Nita thought. She shut the book and stood there holding it in her hand, confused, amazed, suspicious, and delighted. If it was a joke, it was a great one. If it wasn't, don't be silly. But if it isn't? People were clumping around upstairs, but Nita hardly heard them. She sat down at one of the low tables and started reading the book in earnest. The first couple of pages were a foreword. Wizardry is one of the most ancient and misunderstood of arts. Its public image of centuries has been one of mysterious pursuit, practiced in occult surroundings, and usually used at the peril of one's soul. The modern wizard who works with tools more advanced than bat's blood and beings more complex than medieval demons, knows how far the truth that image is. Wizardry, though exciting and interesting, is not a glamorous business, especially these days when a wizard must work quietly so as not to attract undue attention. For those willing to assume the art's responsibilities and do the work, wizardry has many rewards. The sight of a formerly twisted growing thing now growing straight, of a snarled motivation untangled, the satisfaction of hearing what a plant is thinking or a dog is saying, of talking to a stone or a star, is thought by most to be well worth the labor. Not everyone is suited to be a wizard. Those without enough of the necessary personality traits will never see this manual for what it is. That you have found it at all says a great deal for your potential. The reader is invited to examine the next few chapters and determine his or her wizardly potential in detail, to become familiar with the scope of the art, and finally, to decide whether to become a wizard. Good luck! It's a joke, Nita thought, really. And to her own amazement, she wouldn't believe herself. She was too fascinated. She turned to the next chapter.